Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Berry, and this afternoon we have Jim Conca, who is a trustee of the Herbert M. Parker Foundation at Washington State University, and is a contributor to Forbes on energy issues. He has advised the DOE, the EPA, and other state and federal regulatory agencies, and was on President Obama's Blue Ribbon Commission to America's nuclear future from 2010 to 2012. Today, he's going to be talking about the geopolitics of energy, what happened to our nuclear waste disposal program, and he's actually speaking from the American Nuclear Society conference that he's attending. So go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. I actually should mention, I was a professional geologist licensed in the state of Texas for many years. I was cleaning up lead firing ranges at military sites, which there are many. So it's I should have mentioned that last time.
Wow.
So last time I didn't quite finish, and someone said they wish they'd seen the last few slides. You want me to go back and finish that? Because it's kind of an interesting opening to this too.
Yep.
Rate these from most dangerous to least dangerous. These are behavioral things. So what's the most dangerous thing on this list, and what's the least dangerous thing? And if we were in the class, I'd ask people to just shout out, that kind of thing. But most people get the first few. So I'll just give you the answer here. It is smoking by far. It's the most dangerous thing you can do in America. Alcohol, drinking a lot of alcohol is also a typical thing to do. Now, these are the number of deaths over the past 5 years, kind of to smooth off the peaks. And then, of course, John and I have to worry about accidental falls over the age of 65. It's a major killer now. And then coal and, murder, blah, blah, food poisoning. I don't know why we're still killing people with hamburgers. And then down to nuclear. One guy fell off scaffolding and broke his neck at Browns Ferry a few years ago. And so this should give you an idea. Now, a biostatistician gave me grief recently because I had not normalized to the subpopulation. Smoking still is the worst. But then everything else kind of moves around because police work, while only 800 people died in the last 5 years, there's not that many police officers. So the relative danger index is actually higher. This is not a true risk analysis, but it's just kind of give you an idea. And then, of course, food poisoning. It's nice to know that eating is only slightly more dangerous than nuclear power. That should get a laugh. But, we make 1 billion meals a day in this country. So, yeah, 25,000 dead, 5,000 a year. It's not that bad, actually. Now, even non-lethal routine accidents like falling off a ladder, it's safer to work at a nuclear power plant than to sit at a desk trading stocks. Now, why is that? Well, because a nuclear power plant, everyone's worried about safety, and then when you're at a nuclear power plant, you need ladder training to use a ladder. Now, I had to take ladder training. It was interesting, but you have to take ladder training to use a ladder, and you need 2 qualified operators to operate a ladder. So no one ever falls off a ladder in a nuclear facility. But at the 7th story of the AIG building in New York, someone's standing on a rolling chair hanging a picture. I mean, you know that. And so they fall, break their arm, gets reported to OSHA, and these are actual OSHA numbers. So it's just that no one thinks about safety in an office building, but you really think about safety in nuclear power plant. Now, U.S. manufacturing, that is actually dangerous work. Pouring 500-ton ingots of molten iron is kind of dangerous. So why is everyone so afraid of nuclear energy? We told you to be. Sorry, my bad. We've been telling everyone how dangerous nuclear is, or someone's been telling you how dangerous nuclear is for so many years that it's just in the culture. I just watched an auto insurance advertisement recently that had nuclear in it. It's like, what the heck is that doing? It was to imply danger, and it's like, oh, so it's kind of funny. But the reason it is because incorrect but intentional association with nuclear weapons during the Cold War. The whole point of the Cold War was to scare everyone about nuclear. It worked. It just didn't get in that subtle distinction between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. They're completely different, made differently, have completely different basic physics associated with them. So anyway, and then the inaccurate and purposely simplistic modeling of health effects at low doses. Called the linear no threshold dose hypothesis. The whole point is again, this incorrect modeling says any stray photon of energy can kill you. It's like, no, it can't. It takes a fair amount to overcome your immune system, but that's okay. That's a subtle difference. And then the misunderstanding of nature and modern nuclear waste that we'll talk about today. There's just not much of it. All the nuclear waste in one in the entire world could fit in one nuclear waste repository. There's no justification for more than one. So with that in mind, what happened to our nuclear waste disposal program? It actually was going pretty good until the 80s. So to understand nuclear waste, you got to understand how it's categorized. So it's different than Europe because we have so much more defense waste. But spent nuclear fuel is the hottest. It's also the least volumetric. High-level waste only refers to defense waste, bomb waste. There's no such thing as commercial high-level waste. So that's one of the major things that gets discussed that is incorrect, is high-level waste is only bomb waste. Transuranic waste that no one's ever heard of, that's also bomb waste. Okay, it's just a different type, and I'll talk about where that comes from. And then low-level waste, which is medical waste, just not hot enough to fit in the upper categories. Most of it is actually dirt. So if we look at spent fuel, this is what it looks like. It's metallic. Nothing can leak out of this. You put it in certain containers that's very secure. We move it around all the time. High-level waste, though, bomb waste, like up at Hanford, where I am, is this gooey, gunky, peanut butter-like stuff that's nasty, hard to deal with because of the form. You have to put it into some form that's easy to handle. So you either grout it or turn it into glass or something like that. That as long as there's no free water, then it's okay. Then there's transuranic waste, which is kind of all the other bomb waste that's not so hot that it's high level, but has a lot of plutonium and uranium and stuff in it. It's also contaminated laboratory equipment, cement, sludges. It's pretty much the entire gamut of form. But it has to be less than 200 milligram per hour, not to get into units, but less than 23 curie per liter. So that's that. Then low-level waste, again, like I say, is mainly dirt and contaminated junk and medical waste and things like that. That's shallow burial. The top three require permanent deep geologic disposal by law. So spent fuel, high-level waste, and transuranic waste require deep geologic disposal. Low-level waste is just landfill kind of stuff. And we have 4 landfill sites in the US, one in Washington State, one in Utah, one in Texas, and one in South Carolina that we use for low-level nuclear waste. Now, short nuclear primer to understand waste. So uranium-235 splits easily. 238 does not fission easily. You mine it. It's ore, just like iron ore, just like anything else. Natural uranium ore is only 0.7% 235. So you have to enrich it. And for fuel, for a reactor, you enrich it to about 4%, depending on the reactor design. New designs get up to 20. But it's still mostly uranium-238 that doesn't split easily. Nuclear weapons have to be enriched almost completely. So it has to be over 93% 235 because everything has to split at once. And if you have 238 or other junk in there, then it won't do that. So what happens is that a neutron comes into uranium-235 nucleus, splits it into 2 unequal pieces called fission products, 3 neutrons out, 1 in, 3 out. That's why this works, okay? Then if you're a bomb, then all those neutrons see is 235, and then those split and then produce more neutrons. And so now, you're at 1, 3, 9, 27, 81, boom. In a microsecond, you're at, 10 to the 20 splits and 10 to the 20 neutrons, and that's your bomb. Now, the bomb we dropped on Hiroshima was about 13 megatons. I'm sorry, 13 kilotons, which means 13,000 tons of TNT equivalent. If you could put 13,000 tons of TNT in one spot and ignite it all at the same microsecond, you couldn't tell the difference between that and a nuclear bomb. The same mushroom cloud, the same devastation, the same blast radius, the same heat, everything. What you wouldn't have is at the edge a little burst of neutrons and high energy gamma at the very edge. But Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed over 200,000 people. 99% of them died from the blast, not radiation. The little radiation that leaked out in this annulus around ground zero, that's what we call the Japanese bomb survivors. They survived that little bit of radiation at the edge, but almost everyone died of the blast. It's just a big, big bomb. Radiation is incidental. Now, the types of waste, as this neutron comes in and splits uranium-235 into two unequal pieces, those three neutrons in fuel go on not to see another 235 in general, but to see 238. Because again, it's 4% 235 and 96% uranium-238. That does not split. It captures that neutron and turns into uranium-239, which is fairly unstable, and quickly double beta decays to plutonium-239. So you're breeding plutonium from uranium-238. You're breeding, when we talk about breeder reactors and breeding, that's what you're doing. You're creating plutonium-239 from uranium-238. Now, after 2 years, there's so much plutonium bred that it starts producing more energy than the original uranium-235. And after 6 years, these fission products like strontium-90 and cesium-137, those build up to the point that they start scarfing up all the neutrons and the thing fizzles out. It's not spent. It's only used about 5% of the energy in the fuel, but it's got too much junk in it. So you can set it aside and bury it if you want to. You can set it aside and recycle it or reprocess it. Or you can set it aside and wait until we get fast reactors that can burn everything, which Bill Gates is building, the first one in Wyoming. Then you can just burn this waste and get 10 times as much energy out of the same amount of waste. So there's things we can do. Now, what's important here is that the fission products, the pieces that fly apart from the uranium-235 being split, those are the hot stuff, or can be the hot stuff. Most of it is highly radioactive, and you put it in water for 5 years, and 90% of the radioactivity is gone. Okay, there's only two species, strontium-90 and cesium-137, that are really hot, that gamma emitters, and they have a half-life of 30 years. So the rule of thumb is 7 half-lives to background. So 7 times 30, 210 years. So this waste is hot for 210 years. After that, the hot stuff is gone. Uranium-235 and plutonium-239, you can hold those in your hand, and they're not going to hurt you because they're only alpha emitters. And there are some betas associated with that too. But after 200 years or so, the waste is pretty much the same radioactivity as the stuff you take out of the ground. So it's really, there's two types of waste: hot, short-lived, and not so hot, long-lived. So when everyone says this stuff is deadly for 200,000 years, that's not really. It's deadly for 300 years or so. And then after that, not very deadly at all. Easy to handle, easy to move around, easy to dispose of. Again, there's two types of waste here. And that's because the half-life, which is the amount of time when half of the material disintegrates away. So the half-life of most of the stuff coming out of a reactor is in seconds or minutes or hours. The really bad thing about Chernobyl and Fukushima, although no one died from radiation from Fukushima, was iodine-131, because the half-life of iodine-131 is 8 days. Now, it was gone in 2 months, but you have to be prepared for it. And since the Soviets, didn't tell anyone Chernobyl had happened for 2 weeks, people got a pretty big dose from uranium from iodine 131 because they didn't know it and it falls on the grass. Cows eat it, make milk, drink the milk, and blah blah blah. So there was, 1,000 extra thyroid cancers. Of four of them died from Chernobyl. I mean, it's horrible, but only 56 people died from radiation at Chernobyl. No one died from radiation at Fukushima because the Japanese government admitted right away what happened, and people were evacuated. No one ate or drank milk from grass-fed beef for 2 months. So anyway, so nuclear waste is not as simple as you might think. So we're going to concentrate on the stuff coming out of nuclear reactors, but again, there's short-lived hot stuff and long-lived not so hot stuff. Now, the reason the bomb waste is high-level waste and transuranic waste is because of how we make bombs. So this is how we make bombs. So we have a weapons reactor, not a commercial reactor. No one's ever made bombs from a commercial reactor. It would be really stupid and useless to do that. We tried just to show you can't do it because of a couple of issues, which I'll get into if you want to talk about bombs. Anyway, so you have we had 9 weapons reactors up at Hanford site and a couple at Savannah River. So what you do is you irradiate the fuel for 6 months. You cannot leave it in the reactor more than 6 months, or you start breeding in what we call neutron poisons like plutonium-240 and 242 that don't split and just basically screw up the whole chain of reactions. So you got to get it out of the reactor within 6 months. Then you dissolve it up, put it through 5 different processing steps to remove the stuff you don't want there. Okay, so the first 2 steps, where you're pretty much removing most of the fission products like strontium and cesium, goes into what we call the high-level waste tanks, HLW. Then the next 3 steps are polishing steps and concentration steps. So again, you want, because this is to make plutonium for bombs. And you want it to be pure because you want it all to split at the same time. So you're decontaminating it, getting rid of uranium and other junk and any fission products remaining, and then you concentrate the plutonium, and that's what you want. Okay, and that waste goes into what called true tanks. So up at Hanford site, when you hear there's 177 nuclear waste tanks, and 157 are high level, and then 20 are true waste. That used to be that way, sure, but the thing about nuclear waste is that it decays away. Okay, and like I said, the really hot stuff has 30-year half-life or less, and so since that time, the 57 million gallons of Hanford tank waste is not high level anymore. It's mostly transuranic or low level waste. You can think of maybe 600K that are high level waste, but we're treating this 57 million like it's all high level waste still, and that's not true. So since 1970, most cesium and strontium has been removed, and most of the stuff has decayed away. So now most of the tanks are not high level tanks. In fact, you can argue none of them are high level waste. But anyway, so the thing about nuclear waste, contrary to toxic waste in general, is that it decays away. Some of it's long decay times, but then it's not very hot. Some of them short decay times that are very hot. All right, 1957, the year I was born, and the year that the first commercial nuclear power plant came online at Shipping Point in Pennsylvania. So 1957, the National Academy of Sciences had finished a nice 3-year study that said the best disposal option for radioactive waste of any type, from any source, is in massive salt deposits that we have a lot of in this country. Especially the best is near Carlsbad, where we have a deep geologic nuclear waste repository that no one knows about, or very few people know about. Worked there for 10 years, brilliant. Now the thing about massive salt, and this is not domal salt where you find oil deposits and things. This is massive, 6,000 feet of salt. Top 2,000 are particularly pure sodium chloride. So it's very, very tight. It takes maybe 1 billion years for water to move an inch in these rocks. That's why they're great cap rocks for anything. And the thing about at certain depths, like 2,000 feet down, the salt is semi-plastic under the weight of the overburden. And so it actually creeps closed and cannot maintain a fracture or a opening. Okay, so you can drill out a room, fill it up with waste, and it will collapse over about 10-year period. And it's completely impermanent. I mean, it is, an amazing structure, and you probably know more about this than most of my audiences. It's a great host rock for this, as long as it's massive enough and is not domal, because domal salts have spline fractures that can let in meteoric water and things like that. Now, so things start to diverge in the 1970s. So deep geologic disposal adopted, salt's the best. They started looking for salts. The Atomic Energy Commission, the predecessor to DOE and NRC, and we'll get to what happened there. Then 1970, they established these 4 categories of waste, and the EPA is formed. We put reprocessing of spent fuel on hold. People think it's against the law. It's not. We took that hold off in the 80s, but we just haven't done it. And then, so the first Secretary of Energy, Jim Schlesinger, is a great economist, but he wasn't a scientist. He basically, someone had his ear and said, well, we might change our minds in the future. So let's put spent nuclear fuel or high level waste aside, and don't dispose of it yet. And but then the transuranic, which no one knows what that is, continued on into the salt. And then 1982 happened, and the Nuclear Waste Policy Act was passed. And that's the beginning of all our troubles. So now, but since 1970, again, most of the high-level waste is decayed away to true and low-level waste. So not really much high-level waste left. So things should have changed as a result of that, but they haven't yet. Now, in 1982, there were 17 candidate sites for 2 high-level commercial waste sites, which is, again, dumb, but we only have enough waste to justify 1. But hey, we wanted to spread the risk around, which should get a laugh because that's not how you spread risk. But there were some in the south and the west, and then some in the north. South, very south, southwest, northwest, and then some in the north and the south. Now, by 1987, those 17 sites were narrowed to 3. Yucca Mountain, Nevada, which you probably heard about, Hanford Site, Washington State, where I'm up at, and Deaf Smith County, Texas. And now, the answer is, who was Speaker of the House in 1987? Well, it was Jim Wright from Texas. And of course, House Majority Lead was Tom Foley from Washington State. And there's this new junior named Harry Reid from Nevada. And they said, Harry, it's yours. And that's it. I was there at the time. That is the sum total of the decision to pick Yucca Mountain, it wasn't Washington or Texas. Now, as fate would have it, Harry Reid became Senate Majority Lead. And before that, he had, led the effort to shut down Yucca Mountain. In 2006, he became Majority Lead. In 2008, when we submitted the license application, which I was one of the authors, he went to Obama and said, Obama, you're gonna kill Yucca Mountain or you won't get my help in the Senate, which is great because Yucca Mountain's a lousy site. And it was picked for a stupid reason, but that's okay. Everyone said, everyone cried politics over science, but it wasn't. It was politics over politics. It never was a scientific decision. Now, the reason that it is not a good scientific decision, whoops, what am I doing? Okay, is that what makes a good geologic repository? And we'll just kind of go over these. There's 7 criteria we've always used for this. A simple hydrogeology. You want to know where the water's going because the water is your carrier fluid for any contaminants. It's the same in the oil industry. So, you want a simple hydrogeology. You want a simple geologic history. You want a tectonically interpretable area. You want to know where the faults are. You want to know what's going on. Are things moving around? Are things going to be folding and faulting, whatever? And volcanoes, the whole bit. You want isolation robustly assured for all types of waste, meaning it doesn't matter what the waste is. The rock should be able to handle anything if you pick the right rock. You don't need to vitrify or do anything. Minimal reliance on engineered barriers. Now, this is a key one because we like to think we can engineer barriers to flow, right? But for 10,000 years, I mean, really? We don't build things that last 10,000 years. I mean, I love the pyramids. Pyramids are great, but we don't build things that last 10,000 years in general. Then performance that is independent of the canister. The canister and the containers should only be for transportation. Once they are at the site, they shouldn't have to last 10,000 years or more. All right, they're simply transportation canisters. But so, because if your canister has to last 10,000 years, then now you have to build super copper canisters with all sorts of engineering. And again, you're not really assured that it's going to work for 10,000 years. Now, the last one is kind of a funny one. A geographic region that has an existing and sufficient socio-political and economic infrastructure that can carry out the operations without have a proximity to a metropolis. Okay, so we call this the Walmart effect. Okay, there has to be a Walmart within an hour, or you'll never get anyone to move with their family there. Okay, so it has to be big enough to have a Walmart, but not big enough to be like, the city of Las Vegas or Los Angeles or something like that. So you call this a Walmart effect. It's actually one of the most important ones of these 7 criteria. Oh, Yucca Mountain is a highly fractured, oxidizing, variably saturated, dual porosity hydrologic system that sits on the edge of the Las Vegas shear zone. Now, which of those terms inspire confidence? Really none of them. So it's really a crappy rock. I mean, there's no way around it. It does not have a simple hydrogeology. It's very complicated. And now all of the modeling we did in the 90s for this, and that was part of my job. It's just really difficult. It does not have a simple geologic history. It is an interpretable area. It's on the edge of the Las Vegas shear zone with the with the Mojave Block being rotated between the Garlock Fault and the San Andreas Fault. So it's very active. We know what it is, but that's really not what you want. No, it's not. Isolation is not robustly assured for all types of waste. Certain types of waste, now we need to engineer barriers to avoid them getting out, which is not what you want. You don't want to have to depend on engineering to last for these long timescales. Performance independent. Nope, we have to have super copper canisters with super properties in order to prevent this waste from getting out of this repository, because the rock is not going to do anything for you. Now, I'll give you the Walmart effect. Yeah, there's Pahrump is within an hour, and that's fine. And that's great. They want it. Again, local communities generally want these nuclear facilities and repositories because they're great jobs and they're very safe and all that. Now, it turns out to fully implement Yucca Mountain, because of these issues, will cost well over 300 billion. Now it's actually over 400 billion. To put it in the correct rock would cost only about 30 billion, what we thought of 40 years ago when we started out on this. So the engineering we have to do for Yucca Mountain itself will add at least 200 billion extra to the project. And again, it's all of these kind of things. The titanium drip shield really, when that came on, I got a little disgusted and changed projects. But unknown to most, we actually have a deep geologic nuclear repository in salt. Now it was designed and built for everything: spent fuel, high level waste, transuranic, whatever, anything. But it was only politically narrowed to transuranic waste in the 1980s. So, but it continued on into the salt as planned, and it led to what we call the waste isolation pilot plan. And here's the surface facilities. And we started actually shipping the really hot stuff in 2007. Now, these are the kind of 72B casts that we would be shipping high-level waste and spent nuclear fuel from commercial reactors. So we know how to do this. It's a piece of cake, and it's very cheap because it's the right rock. Don't need any engineered barriers, although we have one because EPA doesn't believe that the salt's perfect, but it's as perfect as you can get. So just about an hour away from WIPP, I'm sorry, about an hour away from Carlsbad, New Mexico is WIPP, and it was 16 square miles. This land was set aside in 1992, the Land Withdrawal Act. And when WIPP is full of the present mission, it'll only have used a square mile. We got plenty of room for all the nuclear waste we could possibly generate in 1,000 years. And this ideal Salado salt formation, of which, a lot of the Permian, oil and gas production is occurring underneath the same units, 10,000 square miles of the Salado salt. So if you need to expand this 16 square miles, there's plenty of salt. Now the oil and gas is anywhere from 12,000 to 15,000 feet below the surface. WIPP is only 2,130 feet below the surface. There's no interaction. Some people like to say, oh, the oil and gas is interfering with WIPP or vice versa. No, it's not at all. They're completely different units. So here's WIPP. There are 4 shafts into the underground: air entry, air withdrawal, waste handling shaft, and salt handling shaft. So again, you get down and then you have 4 horizontal drifts. This is all mining terminology. And then you have your panels, each of which has 7 rooms, and each room can handle 13,055-gallon drum equivalents of waste. So it's actually pretty good. We're pretty much almost completely full. The first mission, we're going to add 2 panels on this side and probably 2 more panels on the side. And it's just a fantastic operation. Worked there for 10 years. It was nice working at a facility that was actually disposing of nuclear waste, as opposed to the 25 years I spent at Yucca Mountain, and nothing has been done. Now, the reason the salt is there, as you probably know, being geologists, during the Permian, there was a little arm of the Proto-Pacific Ocean that came into southeast New Mexico, West Texas, and it would flood and evaporate, and then flood and evaporate, flood and evaporate over about 60 million years, and it built 6,000 feet of salt. The 2,000 on the upper 2,000, 2,500 are particularly pure. Now, what's interesting is that if you look at the salt, you can see little microscopic square bubbles. Now, these are crystallographically trapped 270 million year old seawater. And sometimes you have bubbles in them, sometimes you have sand in them, but it's pretty cool. Nothing has happened to this salt in 250 million years. All right, there's been no there's been general regional uplift, but there's been no faulting or folding, no volcanism, nothing has happened. And these crystallographically trapped seawater bubbles haven't moved at all. And that's the only water in the salt. There's a little bit of interstitial water, but there's about 1% water in this salt. It's very dry. Now, in these little crystallographically trapped seawater, we have extracted DNA, 250 million year old DNA, the oldest DNA found anywhere, cellulosics from cell walls, crenulated bacterial husks, things like that. I mean, it's no big deal. It's from halophilic bacteria, which haven't changed much in the last 500 million years. But it's a testament to how nothing has happened here. Because the reason you don't find biomolecules this old in general is because you have, usually you have enough naturally occurring radioactive materials, norm, that you'll radiolytically degrade these materials over time. But this is pure salt. There's not even potassium-40 in most of this salt. There is a potassium chloride layer above this, but this is actually quite pure sodium chloride. So there has been radiolytic degradation. It was never buried deep enough to raise the temperature above 81 degrees. I'm sorry, above 105 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the thermolytic degradation temperature for DNA and protein. So again, nothing has happened here in 250 million years to destroy even these biomolecules, which again is a perfect testament to how this should contain the radioactive waste the way we want it to. Now, when you mine this, again, there's no blasting or anything. It's, it's a soft rock. Of course, if I threw it at your head, it would hurt, but, geologically, it's a soft rock. So we just use, continuous Marriott miner with tungsten carbide fingers to just dig this out. As a result, too, it's incredibly safe. No one has ever died working at WIPP. And in 2000, we started shipping waste there in 1999, the lower level waste, but then the high activity waste, we started disposing of in 2007. This is what it looks like. This is one of the rooms in the panels. Again, this is all salt. There's some rock bolts, in the ceiling, things like that. So we've had 24 years of operation, over 170,000 cubic meters of transuranic waste disposed of, 750,000 55-gallon drum equivalents. 22 storage sites around the country are completely cleaned up. One miner released the environment that was quite minor and did not do anything, although it got everyone all upset. And it wasn't WIPP's fault. WIPP performed perfectly. It was someone put the wrong stuff in the drum up at Los Alamos, and I wanted to wring his neck, idiot, but that's okay. Nothing really happened. No deaths, no people contaminated, things like that. So here we are, 2,130 feet below the surface, and this person here is getting 10 times less radioactive dose than we are, and he's standing in front of nuclear waste. Now he's, half a mile below the Earth, so most of the cosmic rays and solar radiation is filtered out. Again, transuranic waste, you only need a quarter inch of mild steel to completely contain that. The really hot stuff is in the wall behind him, where it was robotically drilled out, robotically inserted, in a 4-foot metal wrap cement plug inserted. So this guy is getting, in fact, the biggest radiation he's getting is the potato chips he had for lunch, because you all know potato chips are the most radioactive food, right? 13,000 picocuries per bag. Well, if you don't, you should. I mean, it's no big deal, but it's kind of funny that everyone's so worried about this, and the biggest radiation he's getting is from potato chips. Now, again, the nice thing about this formation, the Salado Formation, is that it creeps closed over time. So you dig these holes. Oh, I'm sorry. Here is the robotically inserted and plugged higher level waste, higher activity waste, up to 23 curie per liter. I mean, there's harder waste that's already been put into this WIPP facility than was destined for Yucca Mountain in total. And here's what it looks like. Now, once you fill these rooms, then the walls, the floor, ceilings come in, and it just breaks down. Again, you don't care whether the container survives. It doesn't matter. In fact, it's fine if it doesn't, because it's mild steel, so it will keep, any corrosion will keep the system reducing, which is what you like. You want things to be reducing, because then plutonium's immobile, and most of the radionuclides you care about are immobile under reducing conditions, and this water is highly reducing. In fact, it's minus 500 EH, so it's probably the most reducing water in the country. And then, it's back to where it was. This is the hydraulic conductivity is less than 10 to the minus 14. The diffusivity, diffusion coefficient, is less than 10 to the minus 15. These are very low numbers, and they're just the best you can get. And there's no reason to put this stuff in another rock, which is maybe a second-rate rock or a third-rate rock like Yucca Mountain, when you've got the best rock in the world here. And you already have a successful nuclear waste disposal program in it. This is because of the properties of the rock itself. So it's very low porosity, and all of that is tied up in immobile water. The pH is perfect. This is the lowest solubility pH for things like plutonium oxide. The EH is low. In fact, the thermal conductivity of salt is about 5 times that of crystalline rock, like Yucca Mountain. So you can load this up and heat-wise much higher than you could crystalline rock. And then the annealing or this creep closure of the salts goes as the power of at least a sixth of the temperature. So the hotter the waste, the faster it closes, which is amazing. I mean, this is what you want. So you dig out the rooms, you put this stuff in the panel, and it closes quick. Right now, we dig out a panel and we put waste in, fill it up within a year, and then close it off. And it's just ideal. And again, the performance period is 200 million years. For Yucca Mountain, we would struggle for 10,000. And then the law changed and made it 100,000, which is, again, hard to show that your engineered barriers are going to last this long, whereas WIPP doesn't need engineered barriers. So it's just the rock is giving you 200 million years as your performance time, and that's more than needed. So you don't need engineered barriers. The waste form is irrelevant. So why spend the time vitrifying high-level waste? Just cement it up, put it there. You don't need the cladding or the canister to persist underground. The temperature has no effects. The fluid inclusion migration is irrelevant. You can show that, which we did. So yeah, it really is the best place to put anything, and we've already shown that. So why in the world would you put it someplace else? Now here is the 16 square miles set aside by the Land Withdrawal Act for nuclear waste disposal. This is the present underground footprint, these 8 panels. Again, we're going to put 9 and 10 here, probably move on down here. But even if we double the amount of waste, we're still only 1 or 2 square miles out of 16 square miles. So we have plenty of room. And even though we had this minor leak it wasn't really a leak. Again, someone put the wrong stuff in the drum and it popped its top. But WIPP is still 10 years ahead of schedule and $1 billion under budget. Now, I don't know of a federal program that is $1 billion under budget and 10 years ahead of schedule, but maybe you do. Again, if you have the new footprint to put high-level waste here and maybe interim storage for spent fuel, again, you're hardly using up the space set aside for this in the 1992 Land Withdrawal Act. And again, even if you want more, the unit is 10,000 square miles. Then there's interim storage for spent fuel. Now, the thing about these interim storage containers is they are really good. I mean, they're, it's just cement and iron and a few other components, but they just sit on a pad and they cool off over time. And they've already been rated for over 120 years, which is, 4 half-lives of cesium and strontium. So again, this is a piece of cake. I mean, there really is very, very little danger here. The risk is vanishingly small. Now, you probably heard of borehole injection, which is interesting. I've come around to it a bit more lately, because as you know, we can drill holes pretty deep. But the problem is that you have to, for spent fuel assemblies, you're going to have to dig a fairly wide hole. However, the new designs for small modular reactors, for pebble bed reactors, for high temperature, lead cool reactors, their waste can fit in an ordinary, 6-inch borehole. And that's great, because once you get down, as once you get down to, 4 kilometers or so, there's no geologic mechanism to get it back out. I mean, it's so far down, it's there. You need plate tectonics to get it back out, millions of years later. So that's not going to happen. So it really is a pretty good and fairly cheap way to dispose of this stuff. So the possible outcomes for our nuclear waste, which was supported by the Blue Ribbon Commission that Obama put together when he killed Yucca Mountain. I was part of that. It was actually a pretty good commission. Had a bunch of good scientists, good politicians, and good industry folks, a nice mix, 5 each. Again, if you don't, one thing we're trying to do is redefine the high level waste up at Hanford, 57 million gallons, which is no longer high level waste. Redefine it as true, and then it can go to WIPP, or redefine it as low level waste, and then it can go to Texas or something, or build a second salt repository cheaper than something like Yucca Mountain. If you don't do this, then the defense waste is going to stay right where it is. And the environmental impact statements show that's no big deal. I mean, there's, again, very little risk of it getting out. Commercial fuel, you put it into storage till you burn it in fast reactors like Bill Gates is building, and others like China's already built. Or you put that down borehole, or you put that into a second or expanded salt repository. That's it. There's no other alternatives. No other state like South Dakota is going to bring up, raise its hand and say, I'll take it. No, that's just absurd. So this is it. Either you leave everything where it is, or you do some borehole disposal, or you dispose it into WIPP, expand WIPP, or find another salt, because we have lots of salt. Again, WIPP is the best, though, for this. Sorry, the Salado Formation is absolutely the best, because that depth, the creep closure is easily controlled, and it's at the right rates that you want it to be. So this is it. Yucca Mountain, never come back because it's too expensive. I mean, it's a crappy rock. Scientifically, you could maybe convince someone you could do it with enough engineered barriers, but your cost is going to be $400 billion. Whereas if you put it at WIPP, it's not even 40. So again, I think, as most things, it'll be decided by cost, and WIPP is the cheapest. And also, you won't need a single dime of taxpayer dollars, because the nuclear waste fund can handle it disposing it at WIPP, but it cannot handle it disposing anywhere else. Thank you. Any questions? Did I run through that too fast?
Thank you very much, Jim. Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat yet. And I haven't been able to think of a question. I was taking notes extensively, but that prevented me thinking of questions. Yeah. So
well, the whole thing is, we know where to put it. We know how to do it. We've been doing it. We know how much it's going to cost. It's not going to cost a dime, because the nuclear waste fund is just fine to handle it in the right rock, not in the wrong rock. So yeah, but again, I keep getting told correctly that Yucca Mountain is the law. It's the law. It was passed by Congress in '87, and it's like, okay, well, what's easier to change, physical law, natural law, or human law? Okay, so
yeah.
Human law. So again, when we get around to it, we will do the right thing. And as Churchill said, Americans will always do the right thing after they've exhausted all other possibilities. So
there's somebody asking here, what is the air quality in the WIPP?
Oh, it's fantastic. As a previous miner, the mining is all about air. And if you're trying to make, profit on a mine, you just give enough air to make it work, because it's expensive to give good air. Now, DOE is not trying to make money on this. So their air facility, let me get back to that. Their air is 425,000 cubic feet per minute of air, and it's constantly monitored and can be HEPA filtered. So this is good quality air. And the ambient temperature when you're working down there is 81 degrees Fahrenheit in closed off areas, but because of such a high airflow, it's pretty much the temperature of the outside air. So it can get down to 75 degrees, but it's very pleasant to work there, actually. And the only dust is salt, all right, because there's nothing else in the salt. So salt is a nuisance dust. It's not toxic. So, if you have a lot of, if you're mining, and digging out a new room or something, then, you can wear just a simple filter mask, and you're good. So yeah, the air quality is quite good.
So that 400,000, is that what you said? 400,000 cubic feet a minute?
Yeah, of airflow.
Wow,
So
that's
great.
an enormous amount of air circulation.
Yeah, it's enormous and it's great. And the miners love it. See, the funny thing is that DOE first went to Lyons, Kansas, uh, in the 60s to try to find an old salt mine. Now, you don't want an old salt mine because, again, mining for commercial purposes is not the same. Okay, you don't care about something lasting, 10,000 years in subsurface if you're mining to make money. So you're not careful about the mining. So they went to Lyons, Kansas first, and then they got run out of town, politically. And then the Carlsbad was settled by German miners in the 1880s because of the potassium salt there. Okay, so they, the miners, it's an entire community of miners. They really know what they're doing, and so they actually heard about this, in the 70s, like 1973, and they went to DOE and they said, "We'll take it." And DOE was like, "What? You actually want this?" And they said, "Yeah, because we're miners." In fact, when they told them what they wanted, the miners said, "We know how to do that." So you can cut the shape of your cut in salt to choose or determine the rate of creep closure. So if you
Yeah,
want a hole to stay open for 40 years, like the length of the project, you cut a circle because you evenly distribute the stress around the cut. If you want it to stay open, I'm sorry, 100 years, you cut a circle. If you want it to stay open 40 years, you cut a square. So square rectangular drifts, and they'll stay open for 40 years. But the rooms, the waste disposal rooms, you want to close quickly. So you cut them as long rectangles. They're a football field long and 30 feet wide and 13 feet tall, and they will close in 10 years. So again, the miners knew exactly how to do this, and DOE was like, awed.
yeah. I
And of
think
course,
you've
this,
just answered
yeah.
Christopher Motter's question, where he asks, help me to understand the plasticity and how long it would take for the adits to be filled.
So once we fill basically a panel a year, okay? So 700, I'm sorry, 7 rooms that have 13,055 gallon drum equivalent. So we can fill that in a year and then close it off, and the room, the ceiling, floor, and walls come in. In about 10 years, they've contacted the waste and start crushing it. Okay, about 15 years, it's pretty close. It takes 100 years to be perfect, back the way it was, before you actually cut it. The thing, this formation is 2,000 feet thick. All right. The disturbed rock zone, when you cut a panel, the disturbed rock is about 14 feet in all directions. Okay, so that's where you have now increased the fracture density, and you've affected the rock. But out beyond 14 feet, the rock is essentially not knowing you're there. And so when it crushes down, you get 2,000 feet around it and 10,000 feet, laterally. So essentially, it comes back to what it was in terms of the properties very quickly.
And then there was an earlier question that didn't get up. Is there nuclear waste sitting at any nuclear reactor sites like Seabrook in New Hampshire or Yankee in Vermont?
Yes, in fact, the reactors are gone, and the only thing there is waste. So the idea that you're not going to have a nuclear waste repository that you can take all the spent fuel that's sitting around the country and put it there is dumb. I mean, so you need to have a spent fuel, you know, um, um, dry cast storage facility next to WIPP. Put all the fuel as it's used there. Now, a lot of that spent fuel we're going to use again in fast reactors, because they'll burn everything and get 10 times the amount of fuel out of the same waste. That's key. If you want 10 times less waste, we already don't have much waste, but you want 10 times less waste for the same amount of power, then you want to hang on to that and burn it in fast reactors. But if you just want it to cool off over time, and then dispose of it sometime in the future, yeah, just sit it on concrete pad in these dry cast storage. Now, a lot of the stuff there's a lot of radioisotopes in the waste that can be used for medical and commercial devices. So we really don't want to throw this out. We want to also build a reprocessing facility next to the storage space, next to the disposal site, so we can get the stuff out of it we want, and eventually you will have stuff that you want to get rid of, and then that can go on the salt.
Mhm. And then Tony Junta has another question. As you know, there's been lots of controversy over leaking cooling pools at these power station sites. Is there a need for these pools if there's options for disposal?
Yeah, the pools, you only want to sit the water and the fuel in the pools for 5 years. After that, all of the hot stuff is gone except strontium-90 and cesium-137. Those are the only two isotopes, and that's about 6% of the waste is strontium and cesium. And so that you sit, so again, you sit the stuff in pools when it comes right out of the reactor to cool it off reasonably well, and so all the other stuff is gone except those two. Then you put them in dry cask storage, and they're gone in 200 years. So yeah, so they're really, and there's nothing to leak from them because I mean the water out of a pool can leak, but the waste itself is solid, so there's nothing to leak.
Mhm. So that raises a question in my mind. Can you actually, my father years ago in the 40s and 50s used a strontium-90 bomb to X-ray the non-ferrous metals he was working with. And can you recover that strontium-90 and actually use it to?
Oh yeah, the strontium and the cesium, they're used in the radiation facility, food irradiation and medical device irradiation, and that's a big industry itself. Because we don't reprocess spent fuel in this country, we get most of that from like Russia.
Mhm.
But we should be doing it ourselves.
And then I have somebody pointed out the quiz questions weren't really, the quiz questions were made up from the abstract. I'm sorry about that. So I will admit to that.
Yes, I don't grade on a curve. My tests are hard, but that's okay. It doesn't.
And then, are there any questions here? Somebody thanking you for this review of fears and laws, and your presentation reveals the need for geologic science to always be considered in public policy, and that happens to be a very personal beef of mine.
Yeah. I mean, we know the answers to most of this stuff. It's not that difficult. We're just not listened to. It's easy to ignore scientists, right? As you all know. And it used to hurt my feelings. It doesn't hurt my feelings anymore, but it's just annoying.
And then there's a question here about any issue with density distribution in the waste. I'm not quite sure I get it, but
yeah, no, because they're solid metal and oxides, they don't separate in terms of density. If you reprocess them, you can separate them. And also there is density separation in the high level waste tanks at Hanford, the bomb waste, because it's gunk, it's gunk,
yeah, I'm
peanut
getting
butter kind of stuff. So that can separate and with respect to density, yeah.
maybe before people go off, we've got about 1 minute. If we can just run through some of the questions there that were on the test.
Well, I don't have that in front of me, so tell me.
I don't either, but how many kilowatt hours per person are considered necessary to have a good life?
3,000.
3.
3,000 kilowatts per person per year. And that to lift someone up out of poverty. And that's what's going on in the developing world. That's why our energy use is going up and will go up for the next 50 years.
Mm-hmm. And then there's I will send in the next couple of minutes do something about those questions.
Well, read them to me and I'll answer them.
Pardon? They have 30 minutes, I think. And then, and I think that's okay. Which sources of energy are easiest to emplace in developing countries?
Coal, fossil fuel, but especially coal.
Yeah,
They have no infrastructure, no pipelines, no high transmission grids or anything else. Coal is all they can do. And
yeah.
that's why coal is the fastest source of energy generation in the world. Oil is the fastest growing source of energy total, but electricity, the fastest growing source is coal still.
And I think a lot of that is driven by India, which has very few sources of oil.
Yeah. So India, still half of China, and South Asia and Africa.
And then there was a thing about the alternative scenarios for providing energy going forward, business as usual, all non-fossil fuel mix, and all renewables. For which of these is cost not a major hindrance in increasing the degree of implementation in future?
Right. A and B, A and B. So it only becomes a problem with when you try to do all renewables, then you forget it. The costs go astronomical.
And how much must total power production in currently 27 trillion kilowatt hours per year be increased to meet the needs of the world's expected population of 10 billion?
At least 50%.
Yep.
More.
I'm
But
sorry for
may
that.
double.
I'm sorry, I decided to go with the abstract, thinking that everybody would read the abstract and be able to answer the questions. And then it turned out that the talk was not, that the abstract was not particularly relevant to the talk.
Yeah, that was the last talk. The last talk I gave, those
Yeah,
are
and that's again my screw up there. But anyway, I think we covered that. Are there any other questions? No. No. I guess the questions serve their purpose. You have to listen to the whole talk to come and get the answers. But I apologize. I should have asked Jim to prepare the questions, but I didn't want to bother him. So I know he's busy. I think anybody have any other questions? Nope. Okay.
good. Thank you so much. And yeah, so in the another big takeaway by this group is nuclear waste disposal and oil and gas production not mutually exclusive. No big deal. Don't need to interact with each other at all.
You didn't say anything. You mentioned on one slide the Finnish nuclear waste disposal area, but you just didn't say anything about it. Can you add anything?
But yeah, Finland is actually going to be the first to dispose of spent fuel from a commercial reactor, because they're actually building their repository now. And I don't expect the US to get its act together anytime soon. And again, sitting on old pads is really not dangerous. I mean, contrary, it's it's a waste of money, but it's not dangerous at all.
Yeah. The Finnish disposal thing is in crystalline rock. It's in unfractured granites.
Right.
How deep is it, Jim? About four.
Yeah, about 4,000 feet.
4,000 feet.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to be much farther than that, as long as you're below all the aquifers and things, you're
right.
good. And they have a good crystalline rock. It's really hard to find unfractured granite.
Yeah, that was the problem they had in England. They were going to make a disposal facility in granite in the Lake District, and then they found meteoric water in fractures in the granite.
Right.
The Swedes are also building a disposal facility in crystalline rocks, aren't they?
Right. And the Japanese too. Yeah.
And the Japanese, yeah. The Finnish one is interesting because it's not very far from the capital city of Helsinki by American standards. Right. I think only about 40 miles away, as I understand.
There really is there's no mechanism to get it out in any concentration. That's the problem. That's the thing. And just because you can imagine something doesn't mean it's true. So just because you can, imagine all this stuff leaking out and getting into water supplies doesn't mean it's going to, because just the dispersion alone will prevent anything of concentration getting anywhere. Because this stuff disperses, because the rate at which this stuff dissolves is incredibly low. I mean, this stuff is not soluble.
Right.
So the little that does dissolve, if it gets out, it's below any concentration of interest.
Mhm. So I love salt.
Yeah, sounds great.
Salt does the most interesting things geologically. Anyway, thank you very much, Jim, for a wonderful talk. I must apologize for a bit of a screw up there on the questions, but that's my responsibility. And just would like to thank you again.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Yeah.
Thanks,
thank you.
Jim. Appreciate it. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim and John.
Okay.
Take care.